Hi 6th graders, today we're going to be looking at measuring and drawing angles. So you want to make sure you have a protractor because by the end of this lesson you're going to be able to measure, draw, and classify angles accurately. So angles, first of all, are created when two sides share a common endpoint. The vertex is the common point shared by two sides, and it often names the angle. And lastly, the degree is a unit of measure for an angle. There are four types of angles that we're going to be studying. First of all, there's a right angle, which is an angle that measures exactly 90 degrees. Sometimes it's called a square angle because it's like the corner of a square. The nice thing about a 90-degree angle is it's pretty easy to measure because you can grab a lot of things, anything that's rectangular or square in shape, because you can use the corner. So like even a sheet of paper you can use to measure a 90-degree angle. One thing to keep in mind when pictures are drawn, that little square in the corner indicates a right angle. If you don't see that little square, you can't just assume, even though it might look, that it's a 90-degree angle. Acute is an angle that measures less than 90 degrees. If you focus on the cute part, a lot of things are, oh, look at that little puppy. If you think about how some girls will say, oh, it's so cute. If it's like little, an acute angle is a little angle, so it would be less than 90 degrees. So it would be something like that, or something like that. The direction that the angle points has nothing to do with it. Then we have an obtuse angle that measures between 90 and 180 degrees. So obese, obtuse, it's a big angle. So it's going to be open wider than a square. And then a straight angle is an angle that measures exactly 180 degrees. Straight is just that. It looks like a line. Okay? So now what I want you to go ahead and do is pause the video, and I want you to classify each type of angle. Alright, this first one, hopefully you noticed, was obtuse because it's more than 90 degrees. The second one is acute because it's less. Then we have our straight angle, and lastly, because of that little square, our last one is a right angle. Now I'm going to try and demonstrate this the best I can using the iPad because there's always a little bit of confusion. First thing I want you to notice is that on most protractors you'll actually see the unit of measure in two places. So you see here on the outside we have 0 on the left and it goes all the way over to 180 on the right. And then here we have 0 on the inside and then it goes to 180 on the left. The reason they do that is because angles can open in either direction. So the biggest thing you need to make sure that you look for is which way does your bottom arrow point. Okay? That's the 0 you start with. So if your bottom arrow that you're lining up with points to 0 here, then you're going to use the inside measurement. If your bottom arrow points to the left, then you would be using the outside measurement. Or use some common sense as well. If you know your angle, use that 90-degree mark. If you know it's more than 90 degrees, then obviously, like on this side, you don't want to be using the top ones. Now, as far as drawing, we're going to start with drawing one first. You always want to start with a straight edge. Since I can't move my protractor, I'm just going to draw my line right along the bottom here like I'm using the straight edge. Okay. That would indicate a 0-degree angle. Your line doesn't necessarily have to be that long. Then I'm going to draw my vertex or my end point right at the end. Super important that your vertex is always lined up with the middle of the protractor or that 90-degree point. Now what I would suggest doing, since I drew my arrow to the right, I am going to be using the inside marks. Had I drawn my arrow to the left, I could have used the outside marks. So what if I was drawing a 100-degree angle? Since I drew to the right, like I said, I'm going to be using the inside marks. So I'm going to find out where 100 degrees is. It's right here. I can follow that up. So even though it says 80 here, the 100 and the 80 are in the same location. It's just like I said, dependent upon which way your arrow goes. I'm going to draw a little mark at that 100 degrees. And then what I can do is I would move my straight edge and line up my vertex and my mark, and then I would go ahead and draw in my point to make my 100-degree angle. Okay? Now, if you're measuring, it kind of works the same way. Okay? So here, say we had an angle that looked like that. Okay? So now what we're going to do, since we're using the 0, the arrow comes this way, we're looking at the black. Okay? I'm going to be using the outside pieces. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go along the outside, make sure once again, like I said, that bottom line is lined up with the bottom of your protractor, or some of the protractors have a little tick mark or a line on the side that you should line up with. I'm going to line my vertex up with that middle line. I'm going to follow it out. And then here, if we look, sometimes you might have to use your straight edge, especially when you're doing like worksheets or books, and extend your angles out. I'm going to look along the outside, and here we have 30. This mark would be 35, so it's a little bit less than that. So we would say that this angle measures 34 degrees. Now, using what you know, we're going to estimate angle measures. Before we do that though, I'm going to break up this line. So obviously that full line would be a straight angle. So that would be 180 degrees. If I take a line and draw it straight down, this would be a 90-degree angle, and it would be 90 degrees from either way, because it's halfway in between. Then the next common point that we look at is kind of the halfway point. Okay? So if I'm measuring here, this would be 0, this would be 45 degrees, then we have the 90 degrees, then we have 135 degrees, 180 degrees. Or we have 0 degrees, 45 degrees, 90 degrees, 135 degrees, and 180 degrees, depending on which way your angle opens. Now, using that information, I want you to pause the video and estimate the measure of each angle. So if we look at the first angle, if you were to hold up a sheet of paper, you'd probably notice that it'd be about 90 degrees. So 90 degrees would be a good estimate for that one. If you look at your second one, you can still use a sheet of paper. You know that it's more than 90 degrees. If we were to continue out our line, okay, it's a little bit more than halfway, so it means it's a little bit more than 135, so we might say it's something like 150 or 140 degrees. Our last one, same thing. If I draw my 90-degree angle, okay, and use that, it's a little bit less than 45, so we might say that this one is about 35 degrees. Really, we're just kind of looking in the ballpark. So make sure that you keep track of any questions that you have and leave one on Edmodo if you have one, and we will continue this later.